So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angela Peacock, and I'm a subject of the film Medicating Normal. And I also volunteer doing research for Medicating Normal to help spread the word and facilitate important conversations like this one. I am so excited to bring you our fifth interview with one of the wonderful individuals that we have met during our journey of making and screening the film Medicating Normal. Our guest today is attorney Mark Larson. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
So Mark Larson is the director of the Mental Health Litigation Division in the state of Massachusetts since 2012, after practicing for many years in New Hampshire. Over the years, he has handled a broad array of cases in the civil and criminal areas, including felonies, appeals, neglect and abuse, termination of parental rights, and civil commitments. Prior to coming to CPCS, he worked as a managing attorney for the New Hampshire Public Defender and supervised the defense of civil commitments of allegedly sexually violent persons. He has served in many committees and commissions, including the Trial Court Task Force on Mental Illness and Substance Abuse, the Special Commission on Firearm Safety, the Section 35 Commission, and Boston Bar Association Ethics Committee, the Cross-Cultural Committee of the Irish International Immigration Center, and the editor of the New Hampshire Bar Journal. While a law student, he worked at a halfway house in Palo Alto, California for people who had been discharged from acute psychiatric hospitals. These individuals were, as a rule, prescribed significant doses of antipsychotic medications. He is a graduate of Beloit College and the University of California, Hastings College of Law. Over the years, he's been admitted to practice in Massachusetts, California, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mark. I'm excited about this conversation. That is quite the resume that you have there.
Well, if you live long enough, you get to develop a long resume. I've seen a lot of experts, psychiatrists, and psychologists who have 23 or 24-page resumes with all the publications. I don't have all that many publications. Most of what I did when I was with the Bar Journal was do editing. So.
Well, and you were busy working, so that's a good thing. You weren't writing in a desk. That might not be a good thing to publish a lot.
I have been busy working since I was 16. So.
Wow. Well, so I'm going to start the conversation off with a few questions that we had. Things that I'm just curious about, things that come up when we screen the film, and then we're going to let the audience ask questions live. So if you have a question while we're talking, go ahead and put it in the comment section, and Nicole is going to text them to me. So then I will be present with Mark while you guys are all in the comment section. So let's just start a little bit about you. What kind of clients do you work with now? Talk us through what is the Mental Health Litigation Division, and kind of give us what is a day in the life of an attorney who works with people with serious mental illness or problems in living.
So right now, the work that I'm doing is actually the least related to actual practice of law in the sense of representing clients. So what I do is I have 4 staffed offices in Massachusetts that handle civil commitments, people getting committed to psychiatric facilities, and a few guardianships out of one of our offices. And then there is a panel of about 250 to 300 attorneys, private attorneys, and they are also representing individuals in civil commitments and guardianships. So that includes civil commitments to psychiatric facilities, and then we have one office that is responsible for what in Massachusetts is called sexually dangerous persons. These are people who have been convicted of a sex offense and are determined to be by the Commonwealth a danger to be released. So that's a separate office that we have, and the private panel does guardianships. So those are people, mostly a lot of elderly who are going to be, or someone wants to admit them to a nursing home, individuals who don't have anyone to serve as their legal proxy for medical matters. And then something that's known in Massachusetts as a Rogers order, named after a case for Ruby Rogers regarding antipsychotic medication. So if you're going to be administered antipsychotic medication against your will in Massachusetts, you need a court order, and it goes through a process of what's known as substituted judgment. I won't get into that unless someone along the line asks a question. It's different from best interest, which is often used in many states. And puts the judge in the position of trying to decide what the person would decide if they were competent, and it involves considering various factors to make that determination. So you don't want to know what you don't want to know what my day is like. Lately, it's been a lot of Zoom meetings, which I think is all too common.
Yeah.
But attorneys on a day-to-day basis, and now under COVID, it's almost all remote. So in the civil commitment realm, they are getting assigned cases on a daily basis of individuals who are being held against their will in psychiatric hospitals in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is different from most jurisdictions in that the petitioners are private and in some cases for-profit hospitals. In most jurisdictions, the prosecution of civil commitments of those alleged to be mentally ill is handled by a government lawyer, either a county official, county lawyer, or in some cases a state lawyer who works for the Department of Mental Health. So they're meeting with these individuals at this point by Zoom mostly and talking to them. In some cases, people are actually going into hospitals, but because many of them are general hospitals, acute care hospitals, it's not the favorite place for anyone to go right now because of the prevalence of COVID, particularly in Massachusetts. In the very beginning, of course, we were one of the hot spots. Mm-hmm. And similarly, so they'll go and meet the person, find out what they, what's happening with them, try and figure out what the next steps are. In Massachusetts, these cases happen very quickly. So a case could be heard within 2 to 3 days, hearing a trial on the merits, and in no longer than 5 days. So a case that comes in and gets assigned to a lawyer today, that case could be heard on Thursday or Friday of this week, which is really a fast turnaround because they've got to talk to the client, review whatever records they can get access to, and in some cases, hire an expert to review the case and the diagnosis, and if there's medication that's being prescribed, to see what the appropriate medications might be under the circumstances. Many of the hospitals basically produce a whole long list of medications because they want to have the ability to adjust them. Usually that gets whittled down to a few to say, okay, what do you really need, as opposed to everything you'd like to have. For the guardianships, it's a little bit slower process, but it can be very quick as well. And then people will get assigned the case. They'll meet with a client either in person or by Zoom at this point. And those cases will be scheduled in weeks or maybe months from time to time. One of the issues that's come up at this point, again with COVID, and particularly in the very beginning, there were concerns about rationing of medications. Many of our clients in the guardianship realm are elderly. Many of them are also individuals with developmental disabilities. And so we need to make sure that all of their rights are protected in the process. So those are some of the things that the attorneys here are doing. And my job is to oversee them and provide them, make sure they're getting the proper education to handle the cases. And in some cases, I'm keeping up to date on what's happening in the mental health world, so that they're knowing what's new and different, and helping to provide them with competent experts as well. So. Wow. The total of about 300 folks doing it in Massachusetts. And again, Massachusetts is different in that we are actually part of the public defender program. So that's also statewide.
So I don't think a lot of our audience will even know what a civil commitment is.
Sure.
But I'm wondering, can you tell us like a hypothetical client? Because you also mentioned the part where you said the petitioner is the hospital. So I'm wondering, I've been hospitalized, it's no secret, 7 times. So I know what that process is like to be a voluntary commitment, where I say I'm suicidal, I go to the hospital, I am admitting myself, with my own free will, saying I need help, right? So, but you said the petitioner is the hospital. So is that a person that is submitting themselves voluntarily, and then can you take me through, like, what is the difference, and kind of explain what a civil commitment is?
Let me step back. So in Massachusetts, about 70,000 individuals would be, 70,000 admissions. So they could be people who get admitted several times. Mm-hmm. About 70,000 admissions to hospitals in Massachusetts.
per year?
In a year. Yeah, that's been going up. And apparently, based upon an article I read recently, it's going up everywhere.
Wow.
Increased number of admissions. And I think we're going to see more as a result of just the situation we're in right now. That's what all the experts say, is we're going to have increased issues with regard to mental illness.
Yeah.
But most of those people, probably about 50 to 55,000 of them, are admitted initially involuntarily.
Involuntarily.
Yes, against their will. And the typical way that happens is a treating psychiatrist or psychologist or someone else who, just a regular medical doctor, can sign a form which says this person is in need of hospitalization, and they will sign the form. It gets provided to law enforcement. So a police officer might come to you and say, Angie, your doctor thinks you're just going out of control. I'm taking you to the emergency room. So people end up in the emergency room, whatever is the most convenient one generally. Mm-hmm. And that facility, that hospital may not even have a psychiatric unit. And even if they do, they may not have room there. So the person's held in the emergency room, they're evaluated there. Quite often those people are released based upon conversations they have. You say, I was thinking about it. I did make some statements. I'm going to go see my doctor this afternoon, and they can be released. But for those individuals for whom the emergency room doctors don't think it's appropriate or safe for them to be released, their job is to find them an inpatient facility. Massachusetts has between 65 and 70 psychiatric units in both freestanding and in hospitals. Mm-hmm. So the individual would then be taken, unfortunately, frequently strapped down to a gurney in an ambulance from the emergency room to the hospital, the psychiatric unit of a hospital, and they would be admitted. At that point, the overwhelming number of folks become a voluntary patient in Massachusetts. Now, in Massachusetts, and I'm not sure what your experience might have been, but in Massachusetts, for a person to sign in as a voluntary, it's called a conditional voluntary, which means that if you want to leave, you have to give the hospital written notice that you want to leave, and they can still hold you for 3 days.
Wow.
So, like any other kind of, if I go to the hospital and I have chest pain or an upset, bad stomach pains or whatever, or I've broken my arm and I get to the ER and I go, okay, well, you're not going to set it here. I'm just going home. I can walk out no matter how sick I might be.
Right.
If it's a mental illness in Massachusetts, you can't. And they have 3 days to assess you, and then they can file the petition to commit you. And that's, at that point, they file a petition with the court that basically is supposed to allege what your mental illness is as far as their diagnosis is concerned, and why you're a danger to yourself, to others, or unable to care for yourself in the community. And those are standard, I think, across the United States as reasons to hold someone against their will for psychiatric reasons. It's a combination of what we call the parens patriae doctrine and also just the public safety doctrine. So parens patriae means that the state gets to decide what's good for you and what's not good for you. And it's interesting because, of course, in Massachusetts, the decision isn't made by the state. It's made by private hospital. So Massachusetts General, well-known hospital, it's in Boston, Massachusetts. They have a psychiatric unit and they can hold you. We have freestanding hospitals, some of which, as I said, are for profit. So those individuals also get to decide if you're going to be held against your will. They file the petition, there's a hearing, and you can be held for up to 6 months. Wow. Now, that is something that the doctors and the hospitals are more than happy to tell you, that you can be held for 6 months if you don't agree to sign in. The reality is that on average, people stay in a unit for between 1 to 3 weeks. Hardly anyone spends 6 months there. Those people are what most folks would describe as seriously and chronically with mental illness, and that's a much smaller population of individuals. So the civil is you're held against your will supposedly for treatment purposes. There's a lot of lot of dispute as to just what kind of treatment you're getting. It varies from hospital to hospital. There are hospitals in Massachusetts I would never want to go to, but I don't get to choose. If I'm taken into the system this way, I would not have, I wouldn't be able to choose. So I could end up at Massachusetts General Hospital emergency room and end up in a private hospital in southeastern Massachusetts, or even in western Massachusetts, hours away from any family or friends that I might have to provide support. So, it's no secret to anyone that I'm not particularly impressed with this kind of an approach, in spite of the fact that I think everyone is relatively well-meaning.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone yesterday. Well, first of all, I say it's hard for me to even. I'm trying not to show it on my face, but just this conversation is terrifying to me. The implications that if you seek help, you could be held against your will and not be able to leave a hospital. To me, that sounds terrifying. Secondly, me and a man yesterday, he said, like, well, what is a day in the life of being a psych patient? Like, what do you do in hospitals? And I was like, well, they wake you up at 6:30 in the morning. They check your vitals. If you're on suicide watch, you're being watched every 15 minutes while you sleep. So you can't really sleep because somebody's coming in with a flashlight to make sure you're okay. Then you eat breakfast, or you get in line for med check. You take your meds, you go eat breakfast, and then there might be some kind of group like, crisis management or anger management or dealing with hard emotions, and everybody just kind of sits there like, whatever, this isn't helping me. I'm in a crisis. And then you have another med check, where you get in line for your meds, then you eat lunch. There might be another support group. Then you put a puzzle together. You see the psychiatrist for 10 minutes. They mess with your meds. Then you do it all over again. Another line for meds for dinner time, eat dinner, watch TV for an hour, no outdoors. You don't have no shoestrings. You're wearing a hospital gown. You have to ask to go to the bathroom. If you're a female, you might be escorted to the bathroom. You ask for when you can shower, all these things. And I told him, like, that's not very therapeutic. I never felt better when I left the hospital. I always felt worse because now I have to explain where I've been, and what happened while I was gone. So anyway, this conversation just terrifies me because the power that we have to take away somebody's freedom, or to, I have a neighbor. I had an incident with a family member where the family member told the police officer, well, she's a vet and she's off her meds and she has a PTSD diagnosis. So the police officer greeted me in a different way. And what would it be like if I was like a Black teenager, and someone said that? There's differences in how people react to police involvement, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I appreciate you talking about this because it's also helping me, but it's also a human rights issue to me. Human rights and mental health, and how do we treat people when they're in extreme crisis and extreme suffering, So let's move to the second question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, let me say in response to that, as I say, as you and I have talked about, I've been involved with mental health for now almost 5 decades, which I find a little startling. But in any event, what has appeared to me, and from what I gained from reading, not being a doctor myself, is that supportive environments that may not involve any medicines at all can be quite helpful for people just getting themselves together. I mean, people end up in psychiatric units either because they've had some sort of crisis, or someone else thinks they're having a crisis. And it's true. Once you're there, you're detained against your will in a facility you didn't intend to go to, conceivably, and sometimes in an emergency room for far too long. And there's no one who thinks that the emergency room is a good place. No one at all.
Especially not right now. Yeah.
And then you're taken to, in Massachusetts at least, a hospital you didn't choose. So it's not like, I've got a doctor's appointment for a physical this afternoon. I chose the doctor. I specifically chose the doctor for various reasons that I think are important. So it is, it's difficult. And let me say this too, figuring out mental illness is not an easy thing. The brain is an incredible organ in our body about which we know a lot more than we did 50 years ago, but we don't know a lot. No. There's a lot we don't know. So it's a real challenge. And yeah, I think it's The therapeutic value of enforced treatment is something that's a question, and it's a debate that's raged on for many years now.
Yeah, I think I put that in my notes that, if we have to force someone to do something or we take them against their will, is that really treatment or is that trauma? Is that violence? Is the act of forcing something on someone that doesn't want it good?
Right, but most of the time when this is happening, it's looking at it from the other side and talking with family members. It's like there was nothing else I could see to do. My loved one is in pain, and I needed to do something to try and help them.
But it's also like, but why don't we have alternatives? Why is it's either hospital or I can't take you anymore, get out of my house. There's a lot in between of those things.
Well, and I think we all need, from time to time, we can all benefit from a rest. Those of us who can maybe go on vacation, retreat somewhere. And in fact, I think it should be probably growing more of respite.
Respite, yes.
So we only have one facility like that in Massachusetts. I've been to a number of presentations of FIA or FIA, yeah. I've been to a number of presentations with people who've been there, who just talk about, I needed to pull myself together. I needed to take myself out of the situation I was in. And this place, and a FIA house gives them a supportive environment where they can pull themselves together. And it seems to work really well. Now, of course, people are choosing it for themselves. And there's no question, I think, that people who are able to choose their treatment do a lot better than people who are forced into treatment. But there are also those people who will say that forced treatment has saved their lives at the time of crisis. So I don't think there's any good, unfortunately, there's no good cookie cutter.
Yeah, or we don't know who's going to be helped and who's not going to be helped, just like meds,
Hungry, I know if I eat something, I'll probably feel better. Even if I would like to choose that, but it's complicated, and there's maybe people sometimes have very simple answers, and I don't know where we don't know where we're headed, because the treatment modalities that were used 70 or 80 years ago, including things like lobotomies, that was cutting edge, no pun intended. People thought that was a valid form of treatment, and thousands of lobotomies were performed. No one does lobotomies nowadays. And electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock, was at a much higher voltage than it is now. And people do say that it helps them, but certainly not the one flew over the cuckoo's nest approach, which was on the far side of things for sure.
Yeah, so let me pause really quick just to say I did a paper on Massachusetts. So a lot of audience members won't know this, but Massachusetts is actually one of the more progressive states. They have criminal justice diversion programs where instead of police answering a mental health call, they might send a social worker with a police officer. They have all kinds of like he said, a FIA is a respite house in Western Mass, and there's a whole Western Mass learning recovery community. You have one. But other states have zero. And the other thing interesting about Massachusetts is their therapist or mental health provider ratio to patients is like 1 to 400, I think.
Yeah, don't get
not that's good, but
no, don't get too carried away. That Boston in particular is a center of medical education.
Yeah,
we have Tufts, we have Boston University, we have
Harvard,
which is everywhere. And so we have a lot of medical care centered here. I lived in New Hampshire for a long time near Dartmouth College, which has a medical school. So the county I lived in had a phenomenal doctor to patient ratio, doctor to citizen ratio. And the quality of care was just fine. I mean, there were some really good people there, but it made it look like we were, richly endowed with physicians, and Massachusetts is the same. So we're training a lot of physicians.
That makes sense.
It's if you don't know a doctor outside of just going to one in Massachusetts, I'd be surprised. And it could be literally everything from just serving them dinner or meeting them at seeing them at a restaurant to knowing them socially through whatever.
Yeah. So, but then also Massachusetts is home to alternatives to suicide training where people can talk openly about their suicidal feelings without being worried that someone's going to call 911 on them. There's Hearing Voices Network, which is an alternative for talking about voices, people that hear voices. There's also open dialogue therapy. She's, what's her name? Mary? I can't remember her name, but she's one of the schools for open dialogue therapy, which is actually from Eastern Europe, is taught in Massachusetts. So to me, Massachusetts is like light years ahead of like, say where I'm from in Missouri, where the patient to client ratio is like 1 to 2,000 or something. Not that everybody in the state needs a mental health person, but just saying that, you know, there's more, I think there's just more room for openness. But also I have a friend in Massachusetts who says, yeah, we have all these progressive things because we have to counteract the Harvard medical model, you know, like we have, it swings severely right or severely left, you know?
There's a lot of vibrant discussion that goes on in Massachusetts, that's for sure. And there's some great things that get offered that are really valuable that you may not get in Missouri unless you're in St. Louis.
Yeah, and we have WashU where I went. But okay, we have a lot of great questions from the audience, which I'm so excited. Yeah, believe it or not. And we're halfway through. So I'm wondering if we can maybe do a lightning round where I give you 4 questions separately, but maybe answers are shorter, maybe, because they're so good. But let's see how we can do, if we can get to all 4 of them. Okay, if you think your diagnoses are BS due to figuring out the symptoms of so-called mental illness, maybe they were just adverse drug reactions, is there a way to have your records changed legally if the doctors won't do it willingly? What is the process like in the US? So in other words, can someone change their records?
That's an excellent question, and I confess that I don't know the answer for the United States even, but I'm not aware of any laws that allow you to challenge your medical records the same way you could say challenge your credit history.
Wow.
So the only thing you can do is put something else in there, conceivably, and particularly with psychiatric diagnoses, since we see individuals with multiple diagnoses over time, and some of them inconsistent with each other. It would be a real challenge. I think the main thing to do is for people to work and control their medical records and not just let everyone have them, which is the reason I think that some of our clients refuse to allow prior hospitalizations, those hospitals, to provide the information to a current hospitalization. Like, I don't want that in there.
That's a good point. Yeah. There's somebody else that asks, do you know of any attorneys in France who deal with hospitalization without consent? That's a long shot. Anybody in France that does this work?
I am not aware of that, anyone in that category, no.
That's okay.
Off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, but I just had to ask though. All right, so the next one is, if the US ever becomes a country with universal health care or socialized medicine, do you see that changing anything about the legalities around mental health and involuntary commitments may change?
No, it's really driven by actually the medical schools and the schools of psychology. That's what's going to make the change. So if there are changes there. So you actually had in the movie, you have one of the docs, one of the psychiatrists is from Stanford, and I actually know somebody else out there who's at Stanford, and he's written a book called Lifestyle Psychiatry. So it's just a lot of different things to do to help you maintain stability in this crazy world we live in. So yeah, I think that's what's going to drive it more than anything else.
Well, because speaking of that, I never thought of it in this way, but as a trained mental health professional, that I'm not doing it, but I was trained to do it. But so what you're saying to me is, I'm with a client and they tell me something really scary, and that, like, I may want to hurt myself, or I'm thinking about hurting my ex-boyfriend who cheated on me or whatever. And then I'm a mandated reporter, and I'm the one that has to request the involuntary commitment, correct?
Correct.
So I wonder, how does that fracture the trust of a person that is seeking someone to talk to? And then I'm thinking, like, as a client, if I'm in the client's shoes, I want this person to help me, so I have to tell them what's really going on with me. But now I'm answered with, now you're going to the hospital.
So we have that problem as well. In fact, we just had this discussion. I've had this discussion twice in the past couple of weeks about clients threatening suicide. clients of various attorneys, both criminal and mental health attorneys, or threatening violence. And so, what do you do about that? And I don't think there's any cookie cutter answer to it. If you have a good therapeutic relationship with your client, then you as the patient have one with your doc, you may be able to work it through. So I would talk about, that people would talk about it. What are you really thinking about? Certainly people have said, I'm going to kill that SOB.
Right.
Not really have any intention of going out and getting a gun and shooting somebody.
Right.
But you do have an obligation to protect someone if you have a really valid belief that someone might go out and do harm. And it does make, in some respects, it doesn't make any difference if there's mental illness involved or not.
Right.
If I think someone's a credible threat, it doesn't make any difference to me whether they have some sort of diagnosis. It's really a question of protecting someone else. Mm-hmm. Just glanced at something recently too about, I think it was about 12 myths regarding suicides in hospitals is what it was talking about. Ooh. And it's consistent with my limited personal experience, and that is that it's not uncommon for people who are going to commit suicide to not tell anyone. And which would make sense. If I want to be good at it, if I want to be successful, I'm not going to tell you. Yeah. So, you have to deal with each situation, I think. As a non-psychologist, psychiatrist, I deal with each situation individually to see what the person's saying and see if we can, I've had people contract for safety, for example.
Yeah. And that means to say, I promise not to do it. I'll see you next week, right?
This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to call you if I get worse or what have you.
Yeah, and it just, because I know a lot of veterans, I'm in the veteran space a lot, and a lot of them say, I'll never tell a mental health professional that I'm suicidal because I know what that's going to mean. So I just wonder how at current, the way that we mandated report or whatever, is that actually a deterrent to people actually talking about it and trying to work with it, because people are learning. I mean, patients aren't dumb. We learn, we're going to learn too. So I don't know. I wonder if that's backfiring,
No easy answer.
No easy answer. All right. So the next question is, thank you for your incredible leadership, Mark. I so appreciate the work you do. Do you know of any people who refuse to sign a conditional voluntary? I don't know if is that a thing? That's a thing. Okay. And that says, what percentage of those patients do the hospitals in Massachusetts go for a commitment?
I don't know the percentage, but I do know that if a person gets admitted through from the ER and they're now in the psych unit of a hospital and they refuse to sign the conditional voluntary form, the hospital will go through the assessment process and determine whether they should be committed for the reasons that the law allows, dangerous to self or others, or a serious enough mental illness that you can't be safe in the community. And I don't know that we know how many people that is. There are some numbers, and I can't say what they are off the top of my head. If the 3 days are up, then they'll get petitioned for commitment.
All right, the next one is, can you speak to use of coerced commitment versus involuntary? I have experienced this myself in Massachusetts.
Coerced commitment versus, well, this is something you and I have talked about. And I did a lot of research, reading, not hands-on research, but reading with regard to substance use disorders, where Massachusetts is among one of the few states that has coerced treatment for substance abuse. Mm-hmm. And I think the best case scenario or best that you can say is nobody really knows. Nobody really can say, yes, this is really effective if you force someone to be treated. Anecdotally, I know people who will swear their lives have been saved by it. So, and I know people who just hate it. It's because they've been...
There's studies to show that after hospitalization, your suicide risk goes up after a hospitalization.
Well, yeah. So the startling thing with regards to substance use, particularly with opiates, is your chances of overdosing after coerced treatment is twice as high as it is beforehand.
Wow.
Because you get deprived with the medications, So your tolerance goes down, you leave, you try and use the same amount that you're using before, and it kills you. And what we've seen in Massachusetts, and I think this is true nationally, is there has been an increase after a number of years of decrease of overdoses. Now, exactly why that's happening, I don't think we really know. And other than these are really not the best of times. So people are getting depressed, and being on heroin, a lot of people feel really good when they're up there.
Yeah, tragic. Okay, next one. This might be a little bit longer of an answer, and I totally allow that because it's a complicated issue we haven't raised yet. So they're talking about long-term forced medication via a court order. So can you talk about a little bit about that? And basically the person's in it right now, and they're asking, like, just can you talk about long-term? So AOT is what they usually call it, assisted outpatient treatment or treatment order. What is that?
We don't have so-called assisted outpatient treatment in Massachusetts. We have what are called Rogers orders, which are orders from the probate court that authorize providers to involuntarily medicate individuals. And I don't think we really have any good information on how beneficial that is. Clearly, there are some individuals for whom it appears to be benefit of this going on. So let me turn it around a little. Here's what I tell and what I've been preaching to our attorneys. It's particularly with people who've been on medication for a long time. The attorneys, everyone in this situation should have an attorney, and the attorney should be paying attention to what their client says. Anybody who has a client who's been involuntarily medicated for a number of years needs to get an expert to talk with them about where that person is and whether the medication is in fact appropriate at this time. I mean, the reality is that all of our bodies change over time. Our metabolism changes. I know I can't eat as much as I could when I was 22, and it's a good thing I don't, because I wouldn't fit on the screen. But since we're not doctors, what I know enough about medicine is that I don't know enough to make really good decisions, and so we have a bunch of experts who are willing to assist us with making these decisions. So the attorney should get someone to do that and evaluate what the situation is right now. And particularly as we get older, that's very clearly true. And so they need to be just reviewed. As far as whether it's beneficial, I'm not sure we actually even have the studies that establish that it is. And we know long-term, there are adverse consequences to almost every kind of medication. You can't watch the morning news without seeing dozens of ads for various medications, and then they tell you all the side effects, which range from bloating to
explosive diarrhea.
There are all sorts of things. It's like I listen to them and I go, I don't ever want to have to take any of those. I think a lot more needs to be done. And we know that for certain things, certain medications, this is also interesting from watching morning news. There are very, very specific drugs that produce the tardive dyskinesia, the muscle, and other behaviors that are a result of long-term medications. And we didn't know that in the beginning when people were prescribing these medications. And we've only learned them, decades down the road. And that's why I'd be very cautious. I am very cautious about the medications I take. The doc, I think, thinks it's the best thing for me right now, conceivably, but they can't tell me. They couldn't tell me that the opioids that were being prescribed necessarily 10 years ago were going to result in serious addiction and death.
Right.
You go to, no, I know that now. So if someone wants to give me painkillers, I go, okay, I may take 2 of those pills. I'll go home. I never take them.
Yeah.
I end up giving them to the pharmacy where they have their disposal places for safe disposal of drugs.
So going back to an earlier question, the group of lawyers that you are the supervisor for, whatever, the director of, they're the ones that come in and kind of like act as the advocate for the person facing civil commitment, or defender. Is that which?
Right. They should not act like the advocates. Their job is to represent their clients. And even if in some cases it's perceived by everyone the client's not competent, our view is that autonomy, the individual decision of the client, is the one that governs. So if I think my client is making a bad decision, it is my job to argue in their favor.
Wow.
And this is particularly important because you mentioned earlier, just being in the hospital, all of our clients who are hospitalized have lost control of their lives. They're told when to get up in the morning, what they can eat, when they can eat, where they have to be now, where they have to be for lunch, where they, what time is dinner, what time they're supposed to go to bed. So one of the things that we do, which I think is therapeutic, is we listen to the clients and we say, okay, my client doesn't want to do that. And here's all the reasons why. In some cases, in fact, not an insignificant number of cases of individuals who've been medicated or treated on and off for a long period of time, they know better. You know better.
I'm the expert in my own body,
in
my life.
Expert in your own body and what medications do. So this is not, and I think we all are. I mean, each one of us probably has a preferred, aspirin, Tylenol, whatever, Excedrin, to decide which one actually works or which one appears to work for us. And
yeah, you told me that before, where there's clients that you see, they know, like, okay, I've tried Zyprexa, I've tried Risperdal, I've tried Haldol. I know that Abilify works for me. And then the public defender will argue for that. Like, okay, they want to force medication. Well, let's do the one that the client actually wants to take, that is acceptable for them. Yeah.
We've had clients who have managed to win the forced medication issue by getting on the stand and testifying, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't work for me. And it can generally be supported in the medical records. That yes, they got Abilify or they got whatever. And that worked really well. There was a very positive response. And of course, new medications come out and sometimes people have serious adverse reactions if you change their medication. One of the few cases I know of where someone was found not guilty by reason of insanity was a change of medicine. As a result of that, one of the known side effects was it could induce in some people a psychotic episode, and he was one of those people.
Wow.
And back on his old meds, and he was back to the way he was before, so he was fine. But he had this one episode and assaulted his wife. Jury found him not guilty because it wasn't him. It was the medicine. So,
wow. All right. So I think we're about 12 minutes left, and I have 2 questions left, and we're checking the audience one more time. But I think I want to go with, I don't know, are our current systems working? Is this working?
Depends on what you mean by the current systems.
I mean,
our legal system is pretty good here. I mean, we've got a group for the civil commitments. We've got a group of dedicated attorneys. The ones who actively do it are about 150, so they handle a total of about 3,000 cases a year between all of them. And then our staff attorneys handle fewer cases, but there are also fewer, not as many of them. So they advocate quite strongly for their clients, and with the results that the client can get what they want. Now, keeping in mind that if you count being committed or not being committed as the won and lost, we only win about 5 or 10% of the time. Most of the time, our clients lose.
Yeah.
And there are things, of course, I would change about that system, but part of it is pushing back to the judges and educating them. Remember, the judges are not psychologists, psychiatrists, or experts in any way, and their job is to listen and make a decision. So part of our job is educating them.
Yeah.
The mental health system, I think overall, I was involved now decades ago in various aspects of deinstitutionalization. And it looked good because the places that I visited, state hospitals, were just terrible. I mean, they were just terrible warehouses of people who were there for decades. and decades and not getting any treatment. I mean, what you described as a day in the life of an inpatient, think about that for years.
Yeah.
And that clearly wasn't working. We never did what we should have done at that time, which was to enhance community mental health, readily available in the community. So in that respect, that can be improved. I can't say it's not working, but it could work a lot better, so that if I'm in the community and I'm feeling depressed, or if I'm in the community and well, number one, you need various resources. So if I'm in the community and I begin to hear voices, for example, having the Hearing Voices group available to me, I can learn that, okay, I'm not the only one who hears voices. Other people hear voices too. And of course, in some societies, those people are the shamans. But that's not true here. And just because I hear voices doesn't mean resources. So if I'm in the community, begin to hear voices.
Okay, yeah.
Then we got some feedback.
Sorry, it's you. Okay. Yeah.
So I don't think there's any question, but the mental health services that we have in Massachusetts, even though it may be better than other states, and in the United States, could experience a lot of improvement and have much more variety. Peer respite, I think, is great. If I'm having a crisis, it's useful for me to talk to someone else who's been through that crisis. And and I know that there are individuals who have been told by earnest, sincere, educated medical care providers that, the conversation is, Mark, really, you just need to take it easy, reduce the stress in your life. I don't think you should go back to college. Don't think about any of the things you have in mind as things you can do. And so then you look around and we have people like Angie Peacock. We have Ellen Sachs, who was told when she had her psychiatric breaks in college and in medical school that she really should just give up, is now a tenured professor at the University of Southern California School of Medicine and the University of California School of Law. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people like that. Temple Grandin, who's, of course, has a serious Asperger's syndrome, was told when she was very young, her mother was told, really, you should just keep her at home or maybe put her in an institution.
And she designed sustainable, more humane ways to treat cattle and animals that were slaughtered.
She's Dr. Grandin. She's got a PhD. I don't have a PhD. PhD. I'm just not capable of doing that. So, I always prefer to believe that people can succeed as opposed to fail. And so we need to have systems in place, a community in place for people to be able to do that. And that's where we really could use improvement. The peer support, you were mentioning some of it. There's a Western Massachusetts recovery learning community, and they're really quite strong advocates for autonomy and independence and self-reliance. It's not saying somebody else take care of me. I'm going to take care of myself. Right. And we want, one of the things I hope our attorneys can do is help empower people to feel that that's something they can do, as we provide them with legal services.
Yeah. So there's like 3 questions in the comments. Okay. And it's kind of hard to, I'm trying to put them all into one, but basically the question boils down to this and this is kind of to your point about judges being educated, right? We're medicalizing human experience. We're calling things illness or brain diseases that may be a reaction to social problems. I can think of a million, like I used to see clients that were immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, and they had every reason to be paranoid and anxious and depressed because they couldn't see their family. They were on papers. They were being targeted, for being picked up and sent back home. There was all these reasons why these people are in crisis, right? And then we dwindle it down to some brain chemical, and then we medicate them against their, you know what I'm saying? Like this system just seems inhumane to me. So I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about that? The way we view people that are suffering.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for because people like me, older white guys, have been running the system for a long period of time. It is so crucial that we, as something that was said in the 60s and 70s, shut your mouth and open your mind. To listen to what other people say. The whole world isn't like me. I mean, I didn't grow up in an affluent family. I happened to grow up in an affluent county. Little did I know at the time the benefit I was getting out of that. Little did I appreciate that until much later in my life. But that doesn't help me necessarily understand a Cambodian refugee, or more importantly, and this has been a lot of the discussion this year, the experience of African Americans and other people of color in this country. You know, I've certainly seen it where people have been diminished and harassed because of the color of their skin or their origin. But when I'm walking down the street, I don't have to be, looking over my shoulder. If a police car goes by, I've never really thought that it's, they're going to come and harass me or stop me and ask me what I'm doing. We have an office in Roxbury. When I go down there, I stick out like a sore thumb, a pasty white guy. But I don't think anyone's going to come up and ask me what I'm doing in Roxbury.
Right.
Because I'm an old white guy, I must have some reason to be there. But you turn that around, and you even in places like Cambridge, you're a person of color, and you can be stopped on, Henry Louis Gates, I think it was, stopped on the steps up to his own house by a Cambridge police officer going, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm going home." That officer just, for some reason, it didn't compute that in fact somebody like that could be living in Cambridge. And there are other communities you can go to that people were like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" Well, I live here. Yeah. But anyway, but that kind of thing, and I've read there's a great book written by a psychologist at Columbia, Robert Carter, and it talks about the successive decades of, it's particularly focused on African Americans, the successive decades of trauma inflicted on an entire population. And certainly there are people who work their way out of that. Mm-hmm. But that's also, let's think about that. I don't know. I know a little bit about your story because you had the courage to share it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I think we have to do. There was a book written a number of years ago now by a doctor who was in fact the head of the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts at one point. And right now I'm forgetting his name. But anyway, he was and then he went to San Francisco, was head of psychiatry at San Francisco General Hospital. And even after all the time he had been in psychiatry, once he retired, he couldn't still figure out why are the people in San Francisco, the homeless people, homeless. So he went out and spent 2 years interviewing them and photographing them. Right. And basically what he found out was like a lot of the stories in Medicating Normal. Regular individuals, some sort of trauma comes along in their life. And that changes things dramatically for them. And they can, they end up on the street. Some of them, with what would be described as serious mental illness. Mm-hmm. And they, he basically came to the conclusion, these are people not much different than myself, except for the luck I've had in my life. Right. And so it was, it's a compelling, I can't even remember the name of it right now. But anyway, it helps to understand the trauma that people can suffer, and also that people are walking around, the people who've suffered trauma or some sort of serious situation, but it's in their lives, serious trauma in their lives. But it's, frequently it's not, when you meet someone for the first time, they don't go, "Well, hi, I'm Mark Larson, and by the way, I lost my mother in a serious automobile accident." That's not the way you start conversations. Right. Although I didn't, by the way. I was lucky to have my mother until she was 97. Wow. But it helps for people, particularly like me, to say, I'm lucky, but I shouldn't be judging other people by the unlucky things that have happened to them.
Right.
And you need to, you need to be able to fix it. And for those of us, we also have to listen. Frequently, frequently we found that things that some of our clients have said that other people find like, oh, I don't believe that. People, we've had one woman who said, I want to just go home to my home that I own. And the people in the hospital were like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. One of our attorneys went out and found, yeah,
she has a home.
Possessed.
Right.
But she owned a home. And so what they thought was fantasy was in fact reality.
Wow.
And we need to, we need to not just, we need to keep that in mind all the time when we're talking with our clients.
Yeah.
Now, if they say they're from Mars, I'll have a little, I'll doubt that a little bit, but
yeah,
I don't know for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I learned as being an intern in an outpatient mental health setting was everybody that I met, even the ones that were serious or deemed, serious mental illness or whatever, they all had a reason for feeling whatever way they were feeling if you just took the time to listen to them and let them tell their story and not jump to, oh my God, you're dangerous, let's lock you up. There's a story to be told in every single one of them. And it's heartbreaking to me. That's probably why I can't do that work, because it's too close to me, and I'm very sensitive to these issues. But that some people have never in their life even had one person that would listen to their whole story and
right.
just sit with them and hold it. And to me, that's like really sad,
We just had one of our private attorneys who shared stories about this is remarkable, quite frankly. He had won 4 civil commitment cases in 1 week, and maybe 2 weeks. Stephen, even that's pretty remarkable. And he had one older woman. I probably can't find it right now, but he had one older woman who, she was, did what I think people would call eccentric. And the doctors thought it was really weird. So she lit her cigarettes sometimes on the gas stove. She danced around and shadow boxed. And
I do that. Uh-oh.
And that she wrote, and she said she was a poet. And one of the questions that the attorney asked the psychiatrist was, well, did you ever ask her about any of her poetry? And he goes, no, as if it really wasn't.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
He finished up the case, asked the judge, Your Honor, my client would like to say something at this point. And she then read one of her poems, which was basically, Lord, I want everyone to be nice to everyone else. I love the flowers. I love the birds and the bees and the ocean and the skies and the seas. And she recites this poem to him, and it's like, there you go, Doc. You missed this one.
Yeah.
It was similar to a case. I get to tell one story, right? Similar to a case I tried early on in my career. It was a serious negligent homicide case. My client was a truck driver from Montreal, Canada, and had a French-sounding last name. So the state trooper who was involved did a whole bunch of stuff and analyzed why the accident happened and said it was my client's fault. I had an expert who was going to say it wasn't my client's fault, it was something else. But I think one of the key questions in the case, because I knew the answer to it, I asked the state trooper, I said, Trooper Paul, you had this case, and my client was in the hospital, even though he was from Canada, he was in the hospital here for 6 weeks. When did you go see him? Well, I never interviewed him. Well, why not? Well, I assumed he spoke French. So we get around to my turn. I said, thank you. And I put my client on the stand so he could testify about what happened. He thought it was his brakes failing. And I said, well, Mr. Tusignan, can you tell me, where are you from? And he speaks with the flat Ontario accent. He was from, Hamilton, Ontario or something. He didn't know French at all. This was just an assumption that someone, again, this was a good trooper. I've known him now for decades. And it was that was just the assumption he made, and he never challenged his own assumptions. And so, this is what we encourage our attorneys to do all the time, is to listen to the clients, respect them, respect their autonomy, fight for them, And if nothing else, you get to the end of it, the client will thank you. The client will believe they've had their day in court, and they may have been treated fairly or unfairly by the judge, but at least someone in the courtroom was speaking for them. And I think that's just so important in this process, is not to diminish your client, but to listen to them. And I honestly believe, and I've had a couple of psychiatrists tell me this, that it actually has therapeutic value for the client.
It does, absolutely. I mean, that's what I just teared up about, is people not having a chance to have their story heard. And it sounds like your lawyers are willing to do that hard work.
I'm expecting them to do that. I'm not sure that all of them do. I don't live in a world of fantasy that they would handle all the cases the way I would handle them. But.
Well, I'm mindful of the time. I could talk to you for another 2 hours, I think. There's a lot we didn't get to, but it was still really good. And I think the audience really enjoyed it. So do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you recommended reading, websites, any words of wisdom, any markisms, anything you want to leave us with?
I have no markisms. I listen to other people, and they say, my father said when I was young, and I go, I haven't said anything that I think is worthwhile for my children to repeat. No, I think if I had to, and this is only because I get the email every Monday, MAD in America has psychiatrists and people with lived experience who are there. So we just look up MAD in America. I think it's helpful. Yeah, that's the one. And then if people are not in Massachusetts, if you're in Massachusetts, find out where your local community with people with lived experience. That community is. They're all over the Commonwealth. They're all funded by the Department of Mental Health. I think it's some of the best things they do. I've been to a couple of meetings in various places. And so, again, it's individuals with the lived experience talking to each other and also figuring out how best to navigate a very complicated system for medical care. And again, people should, if you're the one who ends up being a client of ours or any other lawyer in a civil commitment case, make sure the lawyer pays attention to you so that you have the opportunity to articulate what you would like out of it. And then, and many of the people who live with lived experience also get involved in advocacy. So we mentioned assisted outpatient commitment. We're one of the few states that doesn't have that in a court-ordered form. And part of the reason we don't is because of the testimony of people with lived experience, because they're the how challenging it all is. And please just let me make the decisions about my life. And many of them. I mean, we already mentioned when you were in a tough situation, you voluntarily went to the hospital. So people do that, I think, on a fairly frequent basis. At the end, I think I got this job 8 years ago because I talked a lot about autonomy. It's something I believed from the very beginning of my involvement in mental health, that people really need to be given the opportunity to make decisions about their own lives in a way that's beneficial to them.
Thank you. I can feel your open heart. It's very palpable, which is why I wanted to talk to you. So thank you so much for this conversation.
My pleasure.
All right. So in closing, thank you in the audience for joining us for our 5th interview. If you haven't seen Medicating Normal yet, please check our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch. You'll see a list of upcoming screenings. We have some really good ones coming up. So check back often if you don't see one that you can attend yet. And our next interview will be nope, it was the wrong date. But our next interview will be in 2 weeks. And I don't know what guest we decided on. Maybe Nicole can text me real quick. But we switch back and forth. So Nicole does an interview, and then 2 weeks later, I do an interview. And so Nicole's got it next. And let's see. Last but not least, I just want to thank Mark. Thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for bringing the screening to the lawyers in Massachusetts. We hosted a screening and we invited all his lawyers, and some of them came. It was wonderful. So just thank you for all you do for people to fight for their autonomy, to train lawyers, to see all sides of it. I know a lot of people are helped by you and your organization. So thank you.
I hope so. And thank you for inviting me. This has been fun.
This has been fun.
I hope.
Yes. Awesome. All right. So see y'all later.